So, less than 24 hours to go now until voting opens for the general election. You can have your say. Let's hear from the Conservatives. I am joined now by Work and Pensions Secretary Mel Stride from Devon. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt.
We are in the final throes of this. So, what a time to wheel out Boris Johnson.
Well, I think Boris has a lot to say about what will happen if there is a Keir Starmer government. And he's saying the same thing as Rishi Sunak, as David Cameron, who was at the event, as Theresa May has been saying as one of our former prime ministers. And that is that taxes are going to be going up under a Labour Party. Your pension will be raided under a Labour government. Keir Starmer yesterday made it very clear that the retirement tax, so dragging millions of pensioners into paying tax on their state pension, will go ahead under a Labour government, whereas under a Conservative government they will be falling. So there are big issues at stake tomorrow. And the other thing that he was warning of, and he's right to, is this idea of a supermajority. It appears, if the polls are right, that we're heading towards the largest majority that this country has ever seen, much greater than even 1997's landslide. And under those circumstances, you have to ask the question, how are we going to get a parliament that is going to hold that government to account? And the way you do that is by having sufficient Conservative members of parliament in there to hold it to account. And that also is an important issue tomorrow.
When was it decided, Mel, that with a 14-year record, the politics of fear and trying to make people afraid of what might come next was the best tactic?
So I think what we have been very clearly saying throughout this campaign is, firstly, look, we've achieved a great deal. We got us through COVID. We spared millions of people being unemployed through furlough that Rishi Sunak brought in. We've got inflation down that came to our shores through the Ukrainian war and supported people with the cost of living payments through that. And we're now getting taxes down and will continue to do so. And that's a very positive message about what we've been about and what the future can be under a Conservative government. But it's also right, Matt, absolutely right, that we make it very clear what the alternative is. And the alternative is much higher taxes under the Labour Party. In fact, the IFS, not me, the IFS has said that under their current published plans in their manifesto, that they will take us to the highest tax burden in the history of this country since 1948, when those figures were first produced. And that is what is on the table in this election. These are very big issues. It's not a by-election tomorrow. We know what the result's going to be if those polls are right. We know there's going to be a Labour landslide. But think about having a party in there that is going to be able to oppose some of the things that this government does when the shine has worn off in 6 months' time, when those taxes have gone up, when your pension is being raided, when all of those things are happening. You're going to want to have Conservative representation in Parliament.
It's a bit tragic, isn't it, that you can't refer to a 14-year record and be positive about the future when coming into a general election. I know you talked about dealing with COVID, but of course the former Prime Minister that we heard from last night was given a police caution because of his behaviour during COVID. You gave money to Conservative cronies. The other Prime Minister, former Prime Minister you mentioned there, David Cameron, famous for austerity and cutting public services. And perhaps the most damning fact of all is wages have been stagnant the whole time. We now have about the same amount of money in our pockets as we did in 2010.
So I think we do have a positive story to tell, Matt, and I think I've set some of that out with COVID and getting inflation down.
Mel, actually, why don't you tell us what you're most proud of in your job the past couple of years in Work and Pensions? What have you done?
I've supported pensioners, for example, by making sure that we've found the resources to put pensions up by about 10%, and then in a further more than 8%. I'm proud of the fact that 200,000 fewer pensioners are in poverty now since the last Labour government, when we had the fourth highest level of pensioner poverty in Europe.
I'm proud of working people. Are you proud of fiscal drag, which the Exchequer brought in?
Let me deal with that. I'm proud of the fact that due to our tax cuts, if you're on average earnings in this country, you're paying the lowest marginal tax rate in over half a century. You'd have to go back to the 1970s to have a lower marginal rate of tax.
Why don't we go back further? Because the tax burden on everybody is the highest it's been for 70 years under the Conservatives.
So the tax burden, because of the support that we provided under COVID and because of the cost of living support that my department, another thing I'm proud of, provided to millions of low-income households, disabled people and elderly people, poorer people, I'm very proud of that. Because of all that, of course, taxes have gone up. They've gone up around the world as a consequence of those kind of measures, but they are now coming down, and that is the point. And if you look at what the IFS is saying, not me, as to the trajectory of the two parties, Labour and Conservative, Labour are going to take us to the highest tax burden in our history by the end of the Parliament, higher than it was in 1948. That will not happen under a Conservative government where we will be cutting people's taxes. The retirement tax on pensioners will be absolutely appalling. We remember the last Labour government, Matt. They put pensions up 75p. That was what Gordon Brown did. We had the fourth highest level of pensioner poverty in Europe. And that's the consequence of Labour policies. And we're going to see that all over again. So if you're a pensioner, get ready, start saving now, because something's coming your way in the form of additional taxes. And I don't
Final question. The government in Wales last night agreed to bring in legislation forbidding politicians from lying. You ever told a lie?
Well, I'm not going to draw into questions like that, but ingenious.
It's an impossible one to answer, to be fair. I'll take that.
No,
but what do you think of the legislation?
Well, it seems to me that it'll all come down to how do you define that particular term, which will probably be extraordinarily difficult. But this is the first I've heard of it. I haven't had a chance to look at it, so I probably can't comment any further than that, I think.
All right. Mel Stride, thank you very much indeed for your time.